First of all, on behalf of the Statistical Society of Australia, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the country, in our case, the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people, and their connections to land, sea, and community. And we pay our respect to the elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people that might be present here today or online. Welcome everyone. My name is Luca Maestrini and I'm the president of the Canberra branch, the ACT branch of SSA. And it's my pleasure to introduce the speaker of today's meeting, Associate Professor Grace Joshi. Before I formally introduce her, let me just spend a couple of words on the workshop we are going to have here in Canberra on the 10th of September. It's a workshop titled Distributional Regression, and it will be given by Professor Gillian Heller from University of Sydney. Registrations are still open. You can find all relevant information online. I'll be personally attending the workshop, and I can guarantee the presenter Gillian will be a great instructor and lecturer at the workshop. Okay, before we start, let's keep questions for the end of the talk. You can post your questions online in the chat on Zoom. Okay, let's give a nice introduction to Grace. Associate Professor Grace Joshi leads the Statistical Methods in Large-Scale Epidemiology program of work at the National Centre of Epidemiology and Population Health at the ANU. And research includes a lot of collaborations dealing with, for example, work on tobacco harm reduction and e-cigarette use, which is related to the topic of today's talk. Other work involves research on epidemiology and cancer treatment, and Grace has worked a lot on Aboriginal health projects as well. So let's welcome Grace, and we're all here ready to listen to you. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. So, hello everyone, and thanks for having me today. I hope everyone online can hear well as well. If you can't, please let me know. Before I start, I would also like to acknowledge and pay my respects to the traditional owners of the land and the cultures that are among the oldest. And a lot of my work is also around Aboriginal health and tobacco smoking. So a bit of background. I'm a biostatistician by training, and I largely work with large-scale data sets and linked data sets in coastal epidemiology. So a lot of what I do is chronic disease epidemiology and risk. So of course, tobacco smoking is a large part of it. Tobacco control is a large part of what I do. So what I thought for today is a bit of background on smoking and health. A research showcase, two of the projects that we did, one on tobacco smoking and post-specific mortality in Australia at estimating attributable mortality. The other one is a much more simpler project, but it's a student-led project about population profile of people who smoke in Australia. And the last bit is about generally about working in tobacco control research. So I don't know, it's a bit different. As you can see, each of the segments are a bit different. So if there are questions along the way, please feel free to raise your hand. So to begin with a bit of background on smoking and health. So globally, well, there are 1.2 billion daily smokers, 15 years and older, and 1 billion males, 200 million females. People smoke on average 15 cigarettes a day. And of course, the prevalence and usage of smoking patterns vary really widely according to geography. How do we get there? Well, first of all, tobacco is hugely addictive, and there's a whole history behind it, like, very purposeful marketing and active promotion of tobacco for a long decades-long promotion. There was largely ignorance about the harms of tobacco in the early days. Regulations, all the countries have been putting regulations in place. It took time to put regulations in. And of course, there are priorities, the profits that are involved in tobacco. So as you can see, even doctors were used to actually market tobacco products. It's cool to be smoking tobacco, and even doctors smoke tobacco. So that was the line that was used initially to hook people on this tobacco use. So generally, tobacco use was painted as this shiny, cool thing to do, historically. And it took a while to get off, but that's how we started getting to the levels that we are seeing today. And of course, we have made huge progress. In year 2000, globally, it's a lot more darker, indicating that the prevalence of smoking was much higher in many parts of the world. And we can still see that there are data not available in some parts, even in year 2022. And Australia, of course, the color, you can see the patterns, how the colors have changed, how the prevalence has reduced. And even then, are you able to read this? Yeah, this one. High smoking. Yeah. Okay, sorry about that. I hope you can read better. So these are deaths by risk factors in 2021. Estimates by IHME, the Global Burden of Disease Study estimates. So you can see that smoking is quite high up there, and even blood pressure is high blood pressure is indirectly related to smoking. So the number of deaths by risk factors estimated globally, that smoking is one of the biggest risk factors up there. And it's 8 million premature deaths per year. Those deaths, 71% of deaths are in men. And of course, there are again differences according to OECD countries and other countries. So 100 million premature deaths in the 20th. It's estimated that there are around 100 million premature deaths in the 20th century. So it's still despite all the reductions in smoking prevalences, we are still seeing the impact of smoking that happened over the decades. Now, if we look at what the different conditions are contributing to that burden, again, getting a bit more in depth into the reason. So again, tobacco is up there, and you can see a lot of blue color. So chronic respiratory diseases, cardiovascular diseases, and neoplasms, which are cancers. So they form quite a bit. And there are some other conditions as well. So we'll come to that in the research showcase. But in general, it's affecting different systems of the body. Right? So how about in Australia? So Australia you can see that Australia has made tremendous progress over the last couple of decades. And we were up there in 1990s in around 25% prevalence, and it has come down to around 8% now. And thanks to our tobacco control policies, legislations, and quit smoking campaigns, indigenous tobacco initiatives, excise duty. There are lots of interventions put in place over the years. We have made tremendous progress. So now we have 1.8 million current smokers in Australia, which is a huge reduction from previous years. And Australia is considered a mature smoking epidemic. So I'll come back to what that means. But there is also increasing use of e-cigarettes in Australia now. So tobacco smoking, cigarette smoking is one thing, but a new phenomenon is that there are a lot of e-cigarette users. It's rapidly increasing e-cigarette use in Australia. So 7% in 2023. So when we look at Australian burden of disease, so previously we saw global burden of disease. We look at Australia, tobacco use is right at the top risk factor for fatal burden of disease in Australia. So this is AISW estimate for burden of disease in 2024. So why is that? So we have managed so much, managed to bring the prevalence of smoking so low, but still it's still high up there in terms of deaths. So tobacco epidemic is thought to be occurring in stages. So there is a long delay between widespread smoking uptake and full effects on mortality. So which means people might have been starting to smoke very young, have been heavily smoking for a long periods all through their adulthood, and then that cumulative smoking really contributes to death. So that's the nature of the tobacco epidemic. And the stages are thought to be different for men and women. So for example, for women, it goes slightly differently. So these are based on the stages for countries similar to Australia. And Australia is considered to be at stage 4 or a mature smoking epidemic at the moment. So that's for tobacco smoking though. So we have been through that peak of smoking prevalence, and we are beginning to see the deaths now, like deaths are peaking now. So coming back to the point about adolescent smoking trends and e-cigarette use, there is also concerns that e-cigarette use is picking up, and concurrently, smoking rates among youngsters is going up. So while they try e-cigarettes, they're also switching on to smoking. So concurrent ever smoking uptick is like, there's a forcing. So you can see that this manuscript published by Egger et al. In MJ 2025. So what they have done is interrupted time series analysis on time trends. Like this is Australian secondary school students annual survey looking at patterns of smoking, like whether they ever tried smoking or not. So technically these are school children. So what they looked at is that the trend was the observed trend is in blue. So the observed trend is in blue and the background trend in red. And what you see at the dotted line in the middle, that's actually the emergence of vaping in Australia. So what they have done is looking through interrupted time series analysis, what you're trying to see is there a change in the rate of decline in smoking among Australian school children? So basically at that interruption, what they say is there is a difference in trend, a change in trend. So that's another concern. So putting back to the context, we might think that, okay, we have dealt with, smoking. Now smoking prevalences are very low. So what deaths we are seeing is due to historic levels of smoking among older people. That's one argument. And now there is increasing concern that there is this whole new generation of young smokers who are beginning to become lifelong smokers. So that's our context, or that's the premise on which we are working. So any questions so far about the background? Otherwise, I'll move on to the first research showcase.
Are those curves or things?
Sorry, yeah.
You showed us some plots before, or like
This one?
mortality related to the ones before, mortality related to tobacco consumption. How do you estimate the number of people that die because of?
Oh, so that's coming in the research showcase.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So exactly. So in the slide that I showed, that is from Global Burden of Disease Study. So Global Burden of Disease Study uses a whole new ensemble model. That's basically model because that's global, right? So they have incomplete, sometimes incomplete prevalence data on tobacco, sometimes incomplete deaths data. So they do a lot of imputations and basically a whole ensemble model to create that. That's model. So some of them are model estimates, but the AIHW uses again. It's a technique like you look at lung cancer death, because lung cancer is a proven association with smoking. So you look at lung cancer deaths in a country and kind of estimate what the ratio is and attribute. So there are different techniques there. So so in this research showcase, what we are doing is also another alternative technique. Yeah, so this is a paper published in BMC Med in 2025. So again, this is estimating the relationship of tobacco smoking to cause specific mortality in Australia. So I think many of you are quite familiar with availability of data in Australia and where we get our smoking data from. Of course, we have smoking prevalences from our National Health Survey. That's really good, but we don't have population level information on smoking. Like New Zealand has a question on the census, right? Like about smoking, we don't have that. So a bit of difficulty for policy agencies or departments is that they don't really have a prospective data to look at relative risks of cause-specific mortality among like large in whole of population basis, on a whole of population basis. And then prevalence of smoking itself is another area of difficulty, which we have people like Alice working on small area estimation and trying to work out prevalence. So there are whole different areas of complexity there. But the one where I'm going to is using survey data along with data linkage in order to do that. So this particular paper, this is based on a cohort study. So the questions we posed was, how does tobacco smoking relate to the risk of dying from specific causes of death in Australia? And how many deaths are attributable to smoking in Australia? So we wanted to estimate and see whether, usually we use international relative estimates. Like, for example, the Institute has to substitute international RR estimates and use it on Australian prevalence data to kind of look at how many can be attributed. So this is kind of a benchmarking type of exercise, as well as getting population Australian specific data and getting into a deep dive. So this is based on the 45 and up study. Its baseline survey was done in 2005 to 2009, over 267,000 people. So there's probabilistic linkage done by Cheryl, and there is linkage to cancer registrations, death registrations, causes of death, and hospitalizations. So it's really handy to kind of define your population based on exclusions of pre-existing conditions and verify registration, causes of deaths. So and it also has a lot of socio-demographic and other information, which is handy for confounder adjustment. So in terms of methods, this study included 178,169 people aged 49 years and over. So we looked at cancer registrations and hospitalization history to exclude people who had either cancer or CVD at baseline at the time when they filled the survey. So we're starting with kind of, people who are cancer-free, cancer or didn't have cancer, didn't have CVD at baseline, following them up for cause of mortality through data linkage and estimating, and trying to estimate the number of deaths that can be attributable to tobacco smoking in Australia. So the exposure is tobacco smoking, but also of course, current, past, or never. But we also looked at intensity, smoking intensity, age at quitting, based on survey responses. So outcomes, there are 28 specific causes of death of interest, and each of them were looked at. So hazard ratios for current and past versus never smoking were estimated using Cox regression modeling and adjusting for potential confounding factors. So we're able to estimate the number and proportion of deaths attributable to smoking. So I'll come to that. So once the hazard ratios were estimated, they were applied to smoking prevalences and to national deaths. So AIHW provided national estimates of national deaths for each of those 28 causes. And we were able to look at how many can be now attributable to smoking. So the method used is an extension of the Newtonian formula for smoking attributable fractions. So it allows for multi-level exposures. So the relative risk is estimated, or relative risk, the hazard ratio in this case, estimated from the cohort study. And then prevalence is the exposure among cases. So that's the smoking prevalence among cases. So of the after exclusions, 178,169 participants included. So of course, smoking prevalence was somewhat similar, like in Australia, 8%. Well, the 45 study is not meant to be representative. It is not. But the premise is that, we are interested in risk relative estimates here. We are not interested in prevalences. So what we're interested in hazard ratios. So the premise is that representativeness, even without representativeness, that relative estimates stay valid for the population. So we observed 13,608 deaths over a median of 9.32 years of follow-up. That's 1.68 million years. So this is a main graph. It's going to spend a bit of time on it. It's a bit crowded though, but I think what you need to see is just that the pattern. So these are all the causes of death that we looked at. So at the top, there are 3 different respiratory conditions. Then there are circulatory systems, so all the heart-related conditions. There is peripheral arterial disease, coronary heart disease, cerebrovascular, other circulatory system. Then there's a whole range of cancers. And some selected other causes. The causes we wanted to look at, so selected other causes. So there's cirrhosis of alcoholic liver. We wanted to look at external causes and dementia and Alzheimer's. So there's selected based on expert input and non-associations with tobacco. So both conditions were used. So you can see the first column, that's this column is about deaths. So the first number here, this is 104, for example, chronic lung disease. It has 125 deaths among current smokers, 60 deaths among never smokers. These are the age standardized rates, so 1.83 per 100,000 and 0.06. These are hazard ratios. So the hazard ratio is 36. So there are 36-fold. The deaths from chronic lung disease among people who currently smoke is 36-fold. So lower respiratory infections, 3-fold, 2-fold, and you can see for all the circulatory system conditions, it's increased. So usually when we think of tobacco smoking, there are some usual suspects of cancers like lung cancer or oropharyngeal, like mouth cancers. But what you can see here is nearly every condition we looked at. It's all, it portrays such a dark picture, actually. And even things like external causes of dementia were indicating significant HRs. So what that meant is people who smoked had an increased risk of dying from 23 common causes during the follow-up period compared to people who had never smoked. And now this is a little bit of expansion, further stratification by number of cigarettes smoked. So again, at the top, there is people who never smoked. And this is like 1 to 14 cigarettes, 15 to 24, 25. We could only look at 4 big common causes of death. I'm sorry, I think my throat is not doing very good today, so apologies in advance. So, so what we are seeing is with almost all levels of smoking intensity, the risk of death is increasing. So even with 1 to 14, so this item, this one is actually about 1 to 14 cigarettes a day. That's the hazard ratio associated with it, 21. So again, a common belief is that, people usually talk about being light smokers. I smoke just 1 or 2 cigarettes, occasional smoking. But what this demonstrates is the risk associated with even so-called light smoking. We wanted to look at a bit more finer categories. Again, the sample size, as the sample size becomes smaller and smaller, there are issues. So we need sufficient number of deaths in order to be looking at further stratification. These are results according to age at smoking cessation. So again, people who never smoked are used as a reference, and the age at people quit smoking, so less than 35, 35 to 44, 45 to 54. So we couldn't go a long because this is, this is an older cohort, right? So, and what you can see in the red at the bottom, that's for reference, the levels for current smoking. So what again this shows is a bit promising. Mortality risk certainly diminished with quitting. So quitting smoking at any age is beneficial, although the earlier is better. But excess risks were largely avoided with cessation before 45 years of age. So that was a very important message for a lot of partners in promoting tobacco control. So, people might think that, oh, I've been smoking for so long, what's the point now? So like they're trying to use, the message that it's never too late. Please do so. So this is a smoking attributable fractions that we estimated. Remember the formula I showed earlier. So what we're doing here is using those hazard ratios and applying to national deaths in Australia and case prevalences prevalence of smoking among cases. So there is the dark bars, which are number of deaths attributable to current smoking, and this is past smoking. So when you say this is about proportion of deaths, okay? So this is about of all deaths. So if this is 100% and so on. So for chronic disease, it's actually up to 80% of deaths attributable to either current or past smoking in men age 45 or over. That's how we would interpret it. So what that means is, almost 19% deaths in men, 11.1% deaths in women attributable to smoking. So it's not just some of the main causes of death, but there are a whole range. And what we estimated is 24,000 deaths a year attributable to current or past smoking in 2019. So, and that are nearly double among men than in women. And how about preventable age groups? So again, splitting those age group for 45 years or over, splitting that into two age bands, 45 to 74 or 75 plus. So the same principle. So we have deaths attributable to current and past smoking in men and women in the different age brackets. So basically the 45 to 74-year-old age group is considered a bit more sort of preventable deaths. So a total of 23% of all deaths in that age group were attributable to current or past smoking. So smoking attributable deaths at younger ages, 45 to 74, they were largely due to current smoking though, while in older age groups, they were largely due to past smoking. So as you can see, the dark bars, you know, they're more common here, right? And here it's the lighter ones. So it's not just, you know, they used to, it's current smoking is doing as much harm. So this was a good, it was really great to have Australian like data derived, estimates derived from Australian data, using data from Australia, and estimate that 24,000 people a day, people every year, that is 66 deaths a day, can be attributable to smoking. So it's largely consistent with AIHW estimates, given the difficulties with, you know, we don't have our estimates locally and we are using international estimates and all that. But AIHW's most recent estimates was over 20,000 deaths, so it's close enough. So what we also have now is kind of a much clearer picture, looking at current and past and age groups and so many different causes of deaths. So smoking definitely leads to dying prematurely, and it's estimated to cause nearly 1/4 of deaths in those 45 to 74-year-old people. So people who smoke currently are on average 3 times as likely to die during the follow-up than non-smokers. And the number of causes was just astounding. Like, you know, people are at risk for dying from 23 common causes of death. So that was of the 28 we looked at. So the risk also paints a stark picture, 36-fold hazard ratio, 36-fold for chronic lung disease, 18-fold for lung cancer, 8-fold for a lot of cancers of the mouth and the oral area, 3 to 5-fold from lower respiratory infections or peripheral vascular disease, some of the other cancers, including cancer of unknown primary site. So, which means it could have started somewhere and spread. At least 2-fold of other diseases of respiratory system, coronary, heart disease, stroke, other diseases of circulatory system, urinary tract cancer, then pancreas, kidney, stomach, prostate. That's at least 2-fold. So again, conditions that we might not usually think of. An overall finding was also 60% greater risk of death from dementia attributable to smoking, that among current smokers. The other key finding was the lower intensity smoking carried large risks. So currently 1 to 14 cigarettes is usually considered kind of lower intensity smoking, but that's still associated with 21-fold risk for chronic lung disease and 13-fold for lung cancer. So the risk increased with greater numbers of cigarettes smoked, certainly. But the good news is that quitting at any age is beneficial. So it really provided material for tobacco control agencies. So this is the first comprehensive Australian specific estimates on risk of death from a range of causes. So certainly, so this was in partnership. So as you can see, the authors include people from the AISW and partners that we are working with. So certainly going straight into policy. Now, this research showcase too is not as fancy. It's a very simple exercise of constructing a national population profile of people who smoke in Australia. So it's usually this question about who are the people who smoke in Australia? Who's our target? Like, when you're talking about tobacco control, advertising campaigns, who is the audience? Who's so couldn't really find, so that kept coming up in policy discussions and couldn't really put a finger on it. Like, usually, so this paper was a student-led paper. Jessica is now, this was her medical student project as part of her medical degree. She's still at med school, ANU med school. So of course it includes people like Raglan and Christina from our Indigenous Center as well. So research is usually comparative. So people talk about prevalence of current smoking and smoking. So prevalence of smoking is higher in this group versus that group. So it's usually comparing population groups in prevalence of smoking. And there are stereotypes when we talk about tobacco control. Oh, there's only it's very low. The prevalence of smoking is very low in Australia, and people who are currently hardcore smokers, and that's a stereotype that's commonly used, and no comprehensive profile of population profile of people who smoke in Australia existed. So we decided to create a profile and see what it really is. Okay, so the premise is that the low prevalence is problem specific to population groups. So we don't really know who to target when you are doing cessation interventions. So data sources, well, we just use the National Health Survey and the Borno Torres Strait Islander Health Survey, and applied nationally representative person level weights. So again, nothing statistically complex about this. It is just that usually you would have proportion. So for example, in the survey, if there are current daily smokers, current less than daily smokers, people who used to smoke in the past, people who have never smoked. So you might estimate the prevalence of people who reported daily, smoking daily, and say prevalence is this in the total population. So that's like a column proportion, right? And you might also do that prevalence in females is blah, or prevalence in males is blah. Now what we're trying to do is the other way around. So among the people, who are the people who smoke in Australia? And are there more females? Are there more males? Whom should we be targeting in tobacco control measures? So the findings were really interesting. So 2.5 million people who smoke daily. 92.4% are non-Indigenous. 7.6% are Indigenous Australians. 5.3 billion people ex-smokers. And when we looked at intersectionality, 61% of people who smoke daily are actually in the younger 25 to 54 age group, 58% male, combining both age and sex, about 36% males age 25 to 54. So, and there is disproportionate representation in the most disadvantaged socioeconomic quintile, regardless of geography. You can see that Did I just log out of the Zoom?
I'm sharing it.
Share again?
Yeah,
Okay, sorry,
coming back here.
must have. Okay, sorry about that. How do you do this? Okay. Yeah, so, and 73% born in Australia, 76 are in good to excellent health at the moment. So it's the kind of message that people who are devising tobacco control campaigns need, like in order to see who the target audience is. So kind of not stereotyping who people who smoke are, but on the contrary, this is what we found. So what that also shows is we need of course we need targeted, specific population group strategies, but we also need whole of population strategies and messaging to balance the act. So high risk population approach along with whole of population approach, keeping the population in mind. That was the message. And accountability matters. So this has been receiving quite a bit of media attention, and it's actually used quite heavily by policy partners. Again, not a really statistically complex analysis as such, but what the policymakers needed at that time was actually kind of a bit more information on who should we be targeting. So it's what I meant, what I'm trying to showcase is the kind of research that we do in tobacco control. Sometimes it's about not sometimes, actually all the time. It is about in close discussion with policy partners and trying to figure out what is needed and working on it together. Usually these papers take a long time. For example, the first research showcase, I think it took over 3 years to get to the stages because there were so many aspects of which forces should we look at and which method would be the best for handling all the complexities in the data. What kind of method should we use for estimating attributable fraction given all these complexities? And it takes a long period to work through and work through this, to build the relationship and work through and keep on engaging with policy people. Okay, so that is coming to an end of the research showcase. What I would like to do now is that I think we have about 15 minutes left, right? So a bit of fun bit, I hope, about working in tobacco control research. Well, tobacco control is essentially part of public health, right? So just like any other public health. So the preventing public health, prolonging life, and promoting human health. So these are efforts and informed choices made by societies and organizations, public, private communities, individuals, all involved. And what we do, it's always multidisciplinary. So it always has epidemiologists, biostatisticians, people in policy, in health services, in behavioral science, health economics. So it's always multidisciplinary. So tobacco control sits there in the public health domain. And effective public health has certainly made huge improvements over the course of history. You can see like cholera or smallpox or vaccinations, surgical interventions. So many examples of plague. So tobacco control public health has been at the forefront of making huge improvements and improving people's health. And it's a collective thing, right? It's collective experience. So, and there are different elements to it. I think we and the stats is quite heavily represented here as well. So we do collecting experiences, so data, knowledge systems, history, expertise. So we of course need data. Then once we do that, we have the quantitative, qualitative aspects, analysis, synthesis, modeling, simulation, and then there is implementation too. And then the collective action, which is the policy, what to do next. And it goes in a cycle. So the collective experience, so the central to it is the evidence to it, the evidence, and you collect the evidence and put it into action, reiterate, continue the cycle. So this is what we are trying to do. And some of the usual villains, well, there are of course biological things like COVID-19, I don't know, or mosquitoes, or and then there are sometimes ignorance. People do not know that this is problematic. There's poverty, which you can't, well, partly, I don't know. Well, the causes might be different, but there's poverty, inequity driving some of the villains, driving some of the issues. There are, of course, vested interests, profits, exploitations, and power without oversight in play here, which comes as opposing forces. And there is also the new thing called normalization. Well, I don't know if it's new, but like, again, it's like when we saw how tobacco was initially advertised as being cool, something that doctors do. This is the norm, right? This is the normalization process. So that can be a pushback too. Now, working in tobacco control is the king of it, of all that and more. So we are fighting normalization. So sometimes there is action from community, so-called action from community, and then following it fun. So it's almost like disguising opposition as fun police, fighting vested interests. So there are third parties trying to push back at it, push what you're doing. Why there is a lot of resistance? Because what we do, it actually reduces profits for people who with vested interests. So there's real hard pushback against people working in the tobacco industry. So we within the group, we normally say there is something called a scream test. The more scream you hear, that means you're doing good. Because if nobody is pushing back, it's not hurting anyone. So doing our job is basically being in the firing line. So this is a fun page. It's called Tobacco Tactics by University of Bath. So if you can Google that link at the bottom, you can see the page and all the, it's a wealth of resource about tactics that tobacco industry uses. And sorry, just, okay. So you can see here the kind of things that they do. You can actually click on each of the links and go and see. You can even search Australia on top, and you'll be amazed at the kind of things that come up on it. But what is most striking is the statement that tobacco industry interference is the greatest barrier to progress in reducing tobacco's deadly toll. So there's more than sufficient evidence presented in that page alone, like that web page alone there. So you see there, there are lots of things on the side there, like claiming a public health role, which means that you pretend like you're a public health expert, and support through allies. So tobacco industries, how they bring allies on board and putting up a front. Controversial marketing is there. Corporate social responsibility, putting up a front of corporate social responsibility, involvement in illicit tobacco, influencing science. So that's where I'm trying to focus on, because that's where our premise is, right? Like, how are they influencing science? So one of the example I selected is about creating controversy. So they say that, you know, the industry can fund research that supports interest group positions, publish research that supports interest group positions, suppress research or write letters to the editor, call out things, sometimes, you know, criticize. They use interest groups to disseminate findings that are of interest to them, and interpretations which are sometimes flawed. Now this document is a 1969 internal memo from Brown and Williamson Tobacco Company, stating that doubt is our product. So that's the doubt is our product. So they want to create doubt in the minds of people. So how we want to resist evidence? Like we said before, that in tobacco, in public health, we are relying on solid evidence. We are creating this pattern of informing policy and helping shape policy. But how do you prevent that process? So that's not newly invented. It's right there from 1969. Doubt is our product. So calling out any genuine research, good data, and creating doubts in the minds of anyone, that's one of the biggest problems. There is also insufficient conflict of interest declarations in a lot of peer review papers. So you might look at prestigious journals, read articles, but not see anything declared, because we rely on COI declarations, right? You might not see that. So this is a case study. So it's published in ANC JPH in 2023. A case study of 10 authors selected based on their known relationship to the tobacco industry. So they identified 553 publications, all peer reviewed, from that long period, a decade-long period. 33% of authors provided complete CI, so that's about 1/3, provided complete COI declarations. 51% provided incomplete declarations, and 16% provided no declarations at all. So it's a huge problem for tobacco industries, tobacco research, actually. I'll give an example of an Australian example of how the COI might be camouflaged. So this AHRA, Tobacco Harm Reduction Association, founded in 2017, public media campaigns, industry funded, there's a lot of presentations, lobbying going on. And this, from the Tobacco Tactics page, the University of Bath, they've published this. So where does AHRA funding comes from? It comes from Knowledge Action Change. That's the organization. Where are they funded from? So Foundation for Smoke-Free World. Again, it sounds like it says for a smoke-free world. Again, it is rebranded. That was rebranded in 2024 as Global Action to End Smoking. Again, another organization. And where that funding comes from Philip Morris International. So it's really difficult to keep track of conflict of interest declarations in papers and sort out, what is unbiased, genuine research versus what is pushed against to create controversy, to create doubt. Now, a contemporary statistical debate, I would say, Well, this is data from, there's this New Zealand surveys. There's repeated cross-sectional surveys in New Zealand called Action for Smoke-Free 2025. So they are year 10 surveys administered in year 10 students in New Zealand. I'm not sure, some of you might be very familiar with that. So this paper published by Walker, it's published in Lancet Public Health 2020. And using the same data set, this is published in Lancet Regional Health Western Pacific 2025. So the first one, what it's actually, the paper says e-cigarettes may be displacing cigarette smoking. So what that means is because of e-cigarettes, fewer people are actually choosing to smoke, right? That's the kind of theory put forward there. Again, that interrupted time series, the kind of work that we saw before using Australian secondary school survey results in the earlier slide, same technique used here. What they concluded that vaping may have slowed the rate of decline in ever and regular smokers. So it's the complete opposite. Again, same data, same repeated cross-sectional survey. So this is a kind of evidence that we are having to sift through when working in tobacco control research. I think I might stop here with my concluding thoughts. I think we have been through a lot today, a bit of introduction on the evolution of how tobacco came into picture and over the decades. A bit of a small showcase about the kind of work that we do and also some of the difficulties that we face. So I think the bottom line is in Australia, we still have around 24,000 deaths a year attributable to smoking. That is 66 a day. I think if it, if it were some other cause, it would strike a bell, right? 66 deaths a day is not trivial. And there is increasing concerns about e-cigarette uptake in school children and people who have already been exposed to e-cigarettes, what is going to happen to their smoking habits. So, and working in tobacco control, well, there has been amazing progress, to be honest, and thanks to all the different multidisciplinary work people that are in this area. 20 years of this framework for tobacco control, that's an excellent initiative, WHO framework for tobacco control. So, but tobacco research community has its limits. So the fight is really long and hard. And it's the broader statistical community can certainly help. So when you see something in peer-reviewed papers published, have a closer look. Try and see if there is any unsupported claims or methodological flaws, undeclared COIs. Try and understand, talk about, really need your support. Thank you.
Thank you, Grace. Very interesting. Any questions? Here from the audience in person or online? Yes?
Thank you for a very interesting talk. So there's a lot there to
I have a really.
Oh, okay. So thanks for a very interesting talk. There's a lot happening in Australia at present, particularly in Melbourne. You've probably been following all of this in the media. So you have illegal tobacco shops and organised crime getting into sale of tobacco. Do you want to talk about that? Yeah.
Well, that's another.
I'm
sorry. Yeah, so the question is about illicit tobacco and how that is problematic, right? Well, before even getting to illicit tobacco, the majority of harm is coming from legally traded tobacco. So let's put it there. So again, there's a deflection there, thinking that, oh, this illicit tobacco is a big problem. Well, illicit tobacco, there's illegal trading of tobacco, but legally traded tobacco forms the major part of it. And again, the framing usually tobacco companies use is illicit tobacco, but it's illicitly traded tobacco. So again, it's not quite a health area, I would say. It is for, so we, with that, the research showcase, the first research showcase, we even presented to the border security. So they're part of the policy discussions. Again, I'm not an expert in how to handle that, but what I believe is this kind of harm and evidence certainly helps them navigate the difficulty.
Other questions? Yeah.
One thing that's been striking in The Guardian in the last few days has been discussion how the anti-gun control lobby is starting to, the anti-gun control lobby is starting to win in Australia. It seems to me that one of the problems here is you can win these fights for a bit, but they never really go away. Could you comment on that?
That's exactly, because you will also see, oh, sorry. So the question was about anti-gun laws in Australia, and we keep raising these issues, but the problem never goes away. Well, if you look up at the Bath University, you can see that how many other industries have actually copied tactics from tobacco industry and applied into theirs. So it's not, I'm not saying it's unique to tobacco. There are similar issues happening, but a lot of them is actually learned from tobacco. They are the gurus. and it might be very true.
I have a more technical question. So it'd be interesting to know whether it's common to account for confounders in research regarding tobacco consumption.
Which confounders?
Oh, so let's imagine like people smoking probably they're more inclined to certain behaviors that
Yes.
I don't know.
Yeah, behavioral risk.
Having some prejudice, but
Yeah. So the question is about adjustment for confounders in tobacco research.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it also depends on what your outcome is. Like smoking might be your exposure. In our case, we had cause of death as our outcome, right? So fortunately, with the survey data, we have a lot of behavioral, socio-demographic information, comprehensive information collected. We even have dietary patterns like fruit consumption, red meat consumption, and things like that, alcohol use, other factors which might be problematic, like physical activity levels, pre-existing health conditions. So we were able to adjust for so many of the confounding factors, and there were sequential adjustments as well. So yes, it's not simple, and I think that's also part of the reason why we exclude people without CVD or cancer. The temporality can be a bit of a problem. There are shared risk factors in the sense, some like smoking and there might be multiple risk factors for, say, death from cardiovascular disease or something. So you need to be very carefully adjusting for those confounders. But since in that research showcase, it's cause of death. The biggest confounder is actually age. So what we did was use age as the underlying time variable. So it's very finely adjusted for, and sex is there. Then there is education as a socioeconomic indicators like education and region of residence adjusted for. There are also outcome-specific adjustments depending on which type of cause of death you're talking about. For example, for certain cancers like prostate cancers, you have to take into account whether people are in the habit of going for prostate screening or not. So that's like behavioral, health behavioral sort of variable. Yeah, so